Hello everyone, my name is Fabrice Marandola. I'm the director of CIRMMT, Center for Interdisciplinary Research in Music, Media and Technology at McGill in Montreal. And it's my pleasure to welcome 4 colleagues from the Royal College of Music, no, Royal Conservatory of Music. I always mix that up, sorry. Aaron Williamon, Ginsborg, Rosie Perkins, and George Waddell. And they will speak about their book. And it's really a great pleasure and to have them today. And we won't take more time, and we'll just speak a little bit at the end. Aaron, the floor is yours.
Fabrice, thank you very much. You are correct with the Royal College of Music and the Royal Northern College of Music as well. So thank you. It's a great pleasure. And you know, I've had a connection with McGill for the last couple of years, and it's been a tremendous privilege, really, to be able to collaborate with colleagues in CIRMMT and across the Schulich School of Music. So today, it's a very special day for the 4 presenters here. We this week have had our book Performing Music Research published by Oxford University Press. And we wanted to take this opportunity to mark the occasion with a presentation about the book. So I'll open by saying just a little bit about what we have included within the textbook and why we wrote it. My colleague Jane Ginsborg from the Royal Northern College of Music will talk about aspects of teaching and communicating research. We have all been for many years teaching students at many different levels, from undergraduate to doctorate, aspects of performing music research. And we have quite a lot of experience that we want to bring to the table, and we felt that we've been able to capture that in this textbook. And then we'll hand over to my colleague, Rosie Perkins, who will give us an example of some of the multifaceted areas of research that we get into within the book. So she'll talk about some results of a fascinating project that she's been leading for the past few years called Music and Motherhood. And we will then hand over to George Waddell, who will give another example of research that we capture in the book on performance evaluation. So through this process, we hope to give you both a flavor for why we did this book and also what it has to offer within the sector. If you have questions throughout the presentation, if you could pop those into the chat, I will try to convene a Q&A session at the very end. And I'll put all the very difficult questions to my colleagues and see what they come up with. But we're very happy to entertain any questions that you may have, both about the book itself, but also about particulars of the research that we'll be introducing. So the book here may be obscured by the faces on the screen, so sorry about that. But the cover of the book is on the right-hand side of the screen, and we, as I mentioned before, we've been carrying out courses and delivering courses on research methods for a number of years. We have always relied on books from other fields to give us insight into how to design, how to carry out, how to analyze research from both a qualitative and quantitative perspective. And what we found was that the peculiarities of what we see within music really wasn't captured so well in all the books that we have been focusing on. So we decided that we wanted to come up with a book that would help us to teach better. Now, when it comes to teaching research methods, you may take an approach where you want to focus on qualitative research methods or maybe quantitative research methods. For us, that distinction wasn't quite so important. I mean, in fact, what we see in working in music over many decades now is that it's rather more important to understand the questions that we need to answer. And then we work in a very proactive way to match those questions to the methods that can best answer them. And so in designing the book, we have set it out in terms of the stages that one goes through in answering research questions. So in part 1, we have chapters that address research questions themselves, the methodological approaches that are available to us as musicians, and of course the really important issue of ethics, both in terms of maintaining things like confidentiality and anonymity for participants, but also making sure that we carry out research with the utmost standards and consideration for people who we're working with. The second part of the book, we then introduce 5 chapters that give quite practical advice in terms of how to carry out observations, how to use documents as a source of data, how to go and in a rigorous and thorough way carry out interviews and focus groups. We also, within music research, use surveys and questionnaires extensively, and we run experiments. And so these chapters really provide, in addition to the rationale for why these are good methods, we provide some how-to instructions as well. The third part of the book delves into the analysis of data, whether that data may be coming from qualitative studies or whether we're using statistics. Now, when we originally proposed this book, we quite optimistically put, I think, only 1 chapter of covering inferential statistics, and you see here that they've multiplied and grown. In fact, these are 3 of perhaps the longest chapters in the whole book, but we think they're very accessible instructions for how and why we use statistics in our research. So those 5 chapters really give that taste of how to analyze data. And then finally, we conclude the book with information on how to communicate research. And that ranges from presenting at conferences all the way through to writing journal articles, writing research reports, and doing poster presentations and even speed papers at conferences. And we have, as Jane will mention in a moment, several templates that we've made available on the book's website where you can download and to explore and develop your own work there. So at this point, I will hand over to Jane Ginsborg, who will take us through aspects of communicating and disseminating research.
Thank you very much indeed, Aaron. Can you see me and hear me? I think you probably can. So I just want to reiterate what Aaron said. It's a huge pleasure to be here with you today and to have the opportunity to talk to you about how our book can be used in the teaching and communication of research on music education, psychology, and performance science. So as you've seen, it consists of 14 chapters. So it can be used as a textbook for an intensive single semester course, assuming your semesters are 15 weeks long, or you can use it in a slightly more relaxed way if you have the luxury of teaching over 2 terms or even a full academic year. Each chapter begins, as you might expect, with a brief introduction outlining what the reader can expect from the chapter. But something that sets this book apart from many other methods textbooks, besides its very specific subject matter, is that each chapter ends with a study guide, or rather a guide to further study. There's a brief summary of what was in the chapter. I've given you an example here, a list of keywords, all of which are defined in the glossary, and between 2 and 4 discussion points. And I'll show you one of those in a moment. These discussion points are questions that students can answer or tasks that they can carry out either independently or in small groups. So over the past year, I've been using Performing Music Research as a course textbook with 3 groups of students, with undergraduate students studying applied music psychology, graduate students undertaking taught master's degree in performance or composition with music psychology, and doctoral students who are carrying out empirical research methods and wanting to refresh their knowledge of research methods. Now, while I've retained a lecturing approach to the undergraduate students and basing lectures on the material in the book, the graduate and the doctoral students simply read a chapter and its associated resources each week. And then we've been able to spend an hour or an hour and a half, depending on the length of time I've had with them, working through one or two of the discussion points in small groups. So for example, you might ask students to prepare the first part of this discussion point in advance of the session. So at home, they would write down the main skills that they think are required for qualitative, quantitative, and multi-strategy research, and consider how validity and reliability are ensured in each approach, and the skills needed by researchers for ensuring them. And then, when they came together to do the second part, they could share their ideas with each other, considering how they can develop a wide range of skills appropriate for different methodological approaches. Now, something else that sets this book apart from other methods textbooks is its use of what we call features boxes in each chapter. And they're called boxes because the text in them is boxed off from the main text of the book. And there are three kinds of boxes. There are research spotlight boxes, which are indicated in the main text by the little pages icon. And these consist of summaries of published research studies that illustrate the use of the methods that we're describing in the rest of the chapter. They all have the same subheadings: context, design, findings, implications, so they can serve as useful models for students who are learning to summarize research for the purposes of writing literature reviews, for example. And as a real bonus, 9 of the 17 research spotlight boxes have accompanying films, which you'll find on the companion website. Closer look boxes are indicated by a magnifying glass icon, and they provide information about topics that are relevant to the chapter in which they appear, but also to other chapters and wider issues that students might want to follow up for themselves. So for example, here's one on interviewing skills. And finally, there are controversial topic boxes in every chapter indicated by a hand grenade icon. Now, these highlight ongoing debates, such as whether research participants should always be paid or if payment might be considered a form of coercion. Whether it's ever acceptable for research participants not to give valid informed consent, for example, when they're being observed covertly, and if results that are not statistically significant should be reported. Now, the controversial topic I enjoyed writing most was this one on fakes and forgeries. You might think fakes and forgeries have no place in research in music education, psychology, or performance science, but you'd be wrong. Now, you won't find the names Heard or Wobble or Wilhelm Have a Guess in the name index at the back of the book, but you will find them here in this box, so I commend it to you. Now, each of the keywords at the end of the chapter, as I said, appears in the glossary at the end of the book, and we were delighted to find that we had entries for every letter of the alphabet. The definitions are drawn from a variety of Oxford dictionaries because the book is published by Oxford University Press, shout out to them, and they're congruent with the way that we describe each concept in the main body of the book. And also the definitions are all cross-referenced. So if, for example, you come across the acronym WEIRD and you can't remember what it stands for, you can look it up and you'll find not only that it means samples drawn from populations that are white, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. In other words, and regrettably, the vast majority of the participants in published psychological research to date, but you'll also find that you're directed to definitions of a sample and definitions of a population. Now, apart from the indexes and references, the book ends with 2 pages of abbreviations and symbols, and then 2 pages of the equations that are needed for calculating statistical tests by hand, and a table of Z-scores, or Z-scores, perhaps I should say. Now, we submitted the complete text of the book last June, and we're very proud of it indeed. Since then, however, we've been working on the companion website, and this is yet something else that sets performing music research apart from most other methods textbooks. This only went live a week ago, so it's almost like our new baby, and we are very excited about it. Its main sections are about the book, chapters, and resources. About the book does what it says on the tin, and there's a Meet the Authors page. Now, what's great about the chapters section is that you can browse it by individual chapter or type of resource, and there are 4 types of resource. There are practice data sets. I've got something in the wrong order, but here we are. There are the templates that can be downloaded for attachments to ethical approval application forms and different ways of disseminating research. There are the practice data sets that students can use to carry out the discussion point tasks in the chapters on inferential statistics. And look, there's a link to free statistical analysis software. Then there are the films that really bring the research spotlight summaries to life. And there are practice questions for each chapter. So these are quizzes with true, false, multiple choice, or fill in the blank answers. Now, before I hand over to Rosie, I'll just say something briefly about the resources section of the website. This is currently in 2 parts, a list of associations and societies, all hyperlinked for ease of access, and links to further resources, and then a list of journals in music education, psychology, and performance science, as well as relevant publishers in the arts, education, psychology, and general science. Now, while the book is now published and more or less static until we produce the next edition, the website is dynamic and it's under our control, so we hope to be able to go on adding to it over time. Thank you very much, and I'm going to pass over now to Rosie.
Thank you very much, Jane. And to add to Aaron and Jane, it's an absolute pleasure and privilege to be here sharing this book with you today. I'm going to share some research from one of the spotlight boxes, and this is one featured in chapter 8. And the research focused on singing and postnatal depression. And I'm going to give you a very brief tour of the research, the data collection and analysis methods we use with reference to different parts of the book in which we explore those methods. So in chapter 1, we identify the importance of having a really clear gap in the literature when starting a research project. And for this particular study, we had 2 gaps to identify. The first came from music, and specifically the area of maternal singing. So we know that across cultures, caregivers will sing to their infants and to their children. And it's been suggested that this is evolutionary in the sense that singing can support social cohesion, and not least between caregivers and their infants. There's been research to suggest that this singing can support babies. So for example, amongst premature babies born too early, music can reduce the amount of time that they need to stay in hospital. It can support their feeding and their weight gain, as well as supporting their oxygen saturation. But we know a lot less about how caregivers and mothers use music themselves to support their own health and well-being. And this leads us to the second gap, which comes from health. In the UK, around 1 in 8 women will experience postnatal depression, or PND. And this is a debilitating illness that has symptoms such as very persistent low mood, feelings of anxiety about the baby, feelings of guilt, helplessness and hopelessness, and insomnia and fatigue. And so this can be very debilitating, of course, for the women experiencing it, but also for their babies sometimes and for the wider family unit. And treatments for postnatal depression are incomplete in the sense that many women are reluctant to take antidepressant medication, especially if they're breastfeeding. And although psychological therapies have been shown to be effective in treating postnatal depression, there are often barriers to accessing those, such as very long waiting times. And so in this research, we wanted to investigate how creative interventions, and specifically group singing, can support recovery from the symptoms of postnatal depression. And we had a suite of research questions underneath this main aim, but today I'm going to focus on just 2. Does a group singing intervention support recovery from postnatal depression? And if so, how? In the opening chapter of the book, we discuss the importance of epistemology, of understanding and being transparent about the type of knowledge that we want to generate. And in this study, we very much started from pragmatism. The problem, as I've just described it, started from a real-life health need. And our approach to generating knowledge was to use the methods that we needed at different times to answer the different questions that we had. So we ran a randomized controlled trial, and this is a type of experimental design that we discuss in chapter 8 of the book. The purpose of the RCT was to identify if singing could support recovery. We also had an embedded qualitative strand, as we discuss in chapter 6, where we look at focus group interviews. And the purpose of this qualitative strand was to understand how the women experienced the intervention and how they felt it supported their well-being. So we had a multi-strategy concurrent approach, just as we discuss in the second chapter of the book, where we look at the approaches that we can take to generating knowledge. So for the RCT, we recruited 134 women who had symptoms of postnatal depression. After they had consented to take part in the research, an essential step to any project, as we discuss in the chapter on ethics, chapter 3, the women were then randomized into one of 3 different groups. Either a 10-week program of singing workshops for them and their babies, 1 hour of singing a week in a community setting, led by a professional workshop leader and supported by students from the Royal College of Music. The second group of women were randomized to 10 weeks of creative play. These were run in the same locations with the same leaders, but instead of singing, they focused on creative activities such as storytelling. And the third group of women were randomized to care as usual. This meant that they continued whatever care they may be having, so psychological therapy or antidepressant medication if they were accessing those. And that was the same for women in the singing and play group. For the 10 weeks of the research, at the end of the 10 weeks, when we stopped collecting data, they were then eligible to sign up for a singing program if they wanted. So it was a waitlist control. We collected quantitative data at 3 time points: before we started the 10 weeks, after 6 weeks, and after 10 weeks. And we used a validated scale of postnatal depression, such as those we discuss in chapter 7. At the end of the 10-week program, we then conducted focus group interviews with all of the women who had taken part. For the care as usual group, this was around their experiences of motherhood and of postnatal depression. In the singing and play groups, we covered those topics, but we also discussed the experience of taking part in the creative activity and how the women felt that intersected with their experiences of postnatal depression. We published the quantitative results in the British Journal of Psychiatry. When we looked at our entire sample, we saw a decrease in symptoms of postnatal depression across all 3 groups, and we would expect that given the nature of postnatal depression and its tendency to get better over time. The grey line, the light grey line at the top there, is the play group, the dotted line is the usual care group, and the solid black line is the singing group. And you can see there that the singing group did seem to get better a little quicker, but the statistical tests that we ran and we describe in chapter 12 of the book showed that this was not significant. It could have been down to chance. However, our planned sensitivity analysis took a closer look at women who started the project with more moderate to severe symptoms. And in this group, you can see the grey and the dotted line, the play and the usual care groups, decreased at a relatively similar speed to each other. But the women in the singing group had a much faster improvement in their symptoms, and this was a statistically significant change. By week 6, they'd had a 35% decrease in their symptoms, and over 2/3 of them were no longer symptomatic for postnatal depression. So what might have led to this faster rate of recovery in the singing group? In chapter 9 of the textbook, we report on thematic analysis, which is a type of analysis that we can do with qualitative data, such as those collected from the focus group interviews. And our thematic analysis revealed 4 main categories of effect that the women described. These were based around the activity, the emotional and social aspects of the intervention, and the environment. I'm going to talk to you about themes that came from women both in the singing and the play group. And there were a number of themes that were consistent for all of those women. This included learning new skills, being able to continue using those skills outside of the sessions themselves, such as in stressful situations, feeling good and having positive emotions, social aspects, such as enjoying seeing the baby engaging, such as being part of a group and having a sense of routine and structure in the day. And also the importance of a calm, inclusive environment led by expert musical facilitators. We also looked at what was different from women in the play and the singing group to try and understand what might have been happening in the singing groups. Women in the play group only described the variety and the flexibility of the activities, as a positive enabler of mental health change. But we saw much more when we looked at the singing group, and these purple themes emerged only for women in the singing group. First of all, the mums here described their creative engagement as very authentic. They felt that the groups were co-constructed, allowing them to be creative in a way that made sense to them. One woman explained, "I've been to some other music classes and things like that, and I found them really cheesy, almost like sensory overload. I like how the leader really pays attention to reading all the babies, calming things down when she needs to and livening things up when they're ready for it. It doesn't feel commercial and cheesy. It feels very authentic, lovely music that you can sing at home and not feel like a cartoon character." Emotionally, several themes were drawn out by the women. First of all, that singing was a time for themselves, a form of me time where it was for them, not for their babies or for somebody else. And linked to this, that singing was highly immersive. So one woman described, "I've been working throughout my maternity leave. I'm always using my mobile phone. It's the one time I've actually never picked up my phone. Normally in a class, I'll check my phone, I'll check my emails, but actually I haven't in this class. And that's hugely beneficial to me just to have that time out that I don't normally give myself." The singing also enabled a sense of achievement, and this is really important for women experiencing postnatal depression, who might feel that they're not achieving what they wanted to or hoped to as a mother. And this was linked as well with a sense of identity, and using the singing to regain a sense of identity that is perhaps a little lost in the transition to motherhood. And finally, some of the women explained that the singing helped them to feel connected and bonded with their baby. So we concluded from this that singing, over and above other creative forms of engagement such as play, can support the psycho-emotional needs of mothers at this particular point in their lives. In chapter 14, we discussed some of the different ways that we can disseminate our research and have impact from our research. And we did this in a number of ways. So we had academic articles, as you've seen, and conference papers, but we also disseminated more widely. So for example, we did press releases that led to media coverage in different countries that raised awareness of how singing can support maternal mental health. We've also contributed to policy documents that have recommended the use of music in maternal mental health care. The research evidence has also been used by Breathe Arts Health Research, which is an organisation in London. They now have a programme called Melodies for Mums that's based on the research. They use the same 10-week programme, and they've run that with 300 women and are now starting a new research project with another 600 women to try and replicate the findings. And we touch on the replication crisis in box 8.4. And this is an example of where we are trying to replicate our research. And finally, but very importantly, also the professional development for health and music professionals. So building capacity for this sort of work to continue. And this is a really central point. We do this work from a conservatoire for many reasons, but not least because when we run a project like this, we involve our students and our alumni. And we know, because we've researched it in other studies, that this can be a really transformative experience for musicians. Conservatoires around the world are reviewing and changing their curriculums to support musicians to have lifelong careers in music. And our research gives students direct experiences of new opportunities and new ways of working, at the same time as providing evidence for how music supports health and well-being in society, something that's arguably as important now as it ever has been across music education, psychology, and in performance science. So I'm going to pass over now to my colleague, George Waddell, who'll talk you through one of our other spotlight boxes. Thanks, Georgie.
Thank you very much, Rosie. What a pleasure to see everyone here today, and of course, what a pleasure it's been to work with such esteemed co-authors these past years on this project. What I'll talk to you about is another piece of research that we've done at the Royal College of Music. And in fact, I'll give you a sort of a snippet of two pieces of research that are closely interlinked. And again, it gives some indication of how this process of conducting research aligns with the different sections and chapters of the book. So this particular project is called Time to Decide. So this is a project that I have been leading. It came directly out of my doctoral study. And I came into my PhD study at the Royal College of Music straight out of studying piano performance, out of my master's in performance. And one of the things that we talk about in chapter 1, Rosie mentioned the importance of good, clear research questions. And we also talk about how these research questions are often born of our experience, of our practices as musicians. And this is a project and an area of research that has been very much driven by my own experiences, initially as a performer, then afterwards coming into this world of performance science and performance psychology. And this is the area of performance evaluation, something I've been very interested in for some time as a practitioner. So of course, having our performances evaluated as musicians, this is a key part of our experience, of our trajectory as musicians. It determines where we study, it determines what competitions we get to put in our CVs. It determines how we develop week to week in our lessons, or perhaps even how our students develop. So this is a fundamental part of what we do as musicians. And underpinning these evaluations is some assumption of objectivity, that when we decide, well, this is the winner, this is the person that gets the job, this is the person that gets the position, that is built on something concrete. And one of the things that really fascinated me, that really grabbed me as I was introduced to this world of performance science and psychology through my pianistic training, was the sheer amount of research that really called these assumptions into question, that really turned to the psychological literature, the literature on cognition, the literature on how our brains and perceptions work as humans, that really demonstrates that we don't make nearly as objective decisions as we think we do. And crucially, how what we see literally changes what we hear. So I came into the study really wanting to take those psychological underpinnings, take that model of how our brains work, and question those underpinning assumptions of how our evaluations work, as well as some of those underlying questions that come to us as musicians. And an area I wanted to focus on particularly, because it gave a nice focus to this, was the presence of performance errors, performance mistakes. Because of course, these play a controversial role in our evaluations. We often say that, oh, surely there's more to a good performance than a lack of mistakes. But we also know that the damage that a major memory slip or something like this can have on an examination score or a potential competition win. So this was an area where I wanted to hone in quickly. So the idea of the research was to focus in on how changing the context in which these mistakes happen and the situation surrounding them affects the way that a judge might penalize a mistake. So I'll take you through two studies, or two parts of studies that looked at this specifically. And the first one came with the research question, is a mistake at the beginning of a performance judged more harshly than if you were to make that exact same mistake partway through the performance? So I had heard from many teachers over the years, as I'm sure many of you have, that you have to make sure those first 10 seconds are rock solid because they're really important. So I wanted to see is that actually true? Could we demonstrate this scientifically? So what I did is I took recordings of 5 different pieces across the study. In this case, I'm going to talk to you about 2 of them, Chopin's Minute Waltz and the Black Key Etude. And the nice thing about these pieces is they've got a nice little opening theme that then comes back partway through, a minute and a half or 2 minutes later in the piece. So what I could do is I could take digital recordings of these, so recordings by a pianist but on a MIDI piano, so that it was sort of computerized, digitized musical information. And I could take a few notes in those opening seconds and just shift them as if the piano had just accidentally sort of got into the wrong position in playing that little arpeggio. And then what I could do is take that exact same mistake and copy paste it to where that passage comes back partway through the piece in a different version of it. So what you would hear is something like this. So here's a sort of a clean version that the recording we used of one of the pieces. You'll hear that now. There we are. So some people would have heard that, and they would have heard the whole performance. A separate group of people would have heard this opening. And they pull it back and we're fine. And then a third group of people would have heard that lovely note perfect opening, but then at the recapitulation, when that theme comes back, that exact same mistake, the very same sequence of wrong notes in the same position comes back. So we have an identical mistake. and we have it in 2 different places. So this is what we call a mixed experimental design, in that what we did is we had different groups of people, separate groups, listen to the 3 recordings so that we could compare their answers. But there was also what we call a repeated measures aspect, in that we took their evaluations of the piece at several times. In fact, we took it hundreds of times, because what they did is they were given sort of a digital slider and asked, as your opinion of the quality of this performance goes up and down, just move this slider up and down. So using this continuous measures technique, you can imagine sort of a line that gets drawn of, oh, it's quite good here, oh, maybe less good here, oh, that's better. And what we did is measured this in a number of trained musicians, not just pianists, a range of musicians listening to these recordings. So we have this sort of data that repeats itself, so we can see how an individual changes, and we see how different groups of people hearing the different recordings, how those differ. And in chapter 8, we talk about these differences. And in chapter 10, then, we talk about the importance and the value of visualizing data. And visualizing our data is something that's not only helpful for me to communicate it to you, it's also really helpful for us as researchers to understand our data. And I can remember the precise moment sitting in the Donaldson room in the Royal College of Music Library when I first generated this graph and let out a shout of excitement, because not only had it worked, but there was actually a really clear story to tell. And perhaps looking at, you can intuitively see that story, but let me walk you through it. So that blue line, that's no mistake at all. So that's the average of sort of, I think, 15 to 20 musicians, the average rating, and you can see it holds fairly constant throughout, that blue line. Then look at that red dotted line. That's the mistake in the first 10 seconds. That rating starts much lower, and it does creep back up, but it never reaches that blue line. It never comes back up to where that judgment would have been if that mistake isn't there. And maybe that's not surprising. Major mistake, lower performance rating. But look at that dotted green line, the one that hugs the blue line. See how it tracks the blue line? Then partway through, you can really see where that mistake happened. It drops down, oh dear, but then quite quickly recovers, and it's like it never happened. And by doing this with multiple pieces, we could see, well, is this just a fluke, just one piece, one example? Well, no, so we can take the black PA2, do the exact same thing, have a different combination of people hear each one, and the exact same thing happens again. Blue line, nice and consistent. Red line starts low and never recovers. Green line hugs it, drops, but then it recovers. The mistake is forgiven, like it never happened. If you were only looking at the scores at the end, you would not know that those scores exist. So the visualization of the data tells a great story, and of course we want to dig in, check statistically, is this just random noise, or is there a real strong signal here? And indeed, chapters 10 through 13 of the book will show you precisely how to do those. A bit of a recipe book we've provided where you can follow the steps with free software and conduct these studies. So this was very encouraging to me. So I immediately wanted to run a second study after we'd done this. And we covered a number of other questions in this, and you're welcome to go read them. This particular study was published in the Journal of Music Perception in 2018. Now, in the second study, this was a question that I've been dealing with for quite some time. I can remember even as young as 10, anytime I would make a mistake, I'd pull this really awful face, as if to say, yeah, I know that wasn't supposed to happen. I'm sad about it too. And I thought, well, let's actually see, does pulling a face when you make a mistake, does that change how that mistake is perceived? So in this case, we took the Aeolian Harp Etude, a nice perpetual motion piece where it's just sort of constant notes for a period of time. And we recorded a performance error where the pianist sort of loses their place and then jumps back in. But then we also recorded video footage of the performer either pulling what we call the poker face or pulling this frustrated expression when it happens. And again, we had sort of a mixed experimental design where we had different groups of people watching the videos. We also had musicians and non-trained musicians watching it, so we could look at that role. And then we did the continuous measurement again. So what this looked like is this, and what you can also notice here, see the line where the stage starts. So everything below that line where it's quite dark, that's one video. Everything above that line is a separate video. We spliced a real audience from archival footage from the Royal College of Music in at the bottom, and at the top is recorded in an empty hall so that I had complete control over what we recorded. And this is important because of what we talk about in chapter 3, is sometimes we have to deceive our participants. If I told people, this is a study where I'm going to give you spliced up footage, and I want to see how you react to him pulling this face in this moment, that's going to unnaturally draw people's attention to it. So I have to deceive my participants. I have to tell them, oh, I'm just going to show you a live performance of some Chopin, and that's it. So we have to think about the ethical consequences of this. In this case, is doing this going to make people feel cheated or stupid? And we very carefully control what we say before and after to account for this. So that's why our consideration of ethics is quite important. But what you can see is the result this gives is the impression of a live performance. When the pianist walks in, we have some applause that we spliced in. It feels like this is sort of natural, but in fact, he's walking in an empty hall and we could fully control this setting. Now, in the study, we also looked at his different stage entrances. We won't talk about that right now. What we'll focus on is what happens partway through this performance. Now you can see the camera angles change, and what this means is we could cut to different footage when the cameras change. So in one of the videos, this happens, he makes the mistake, but he poker faces. So very little reaction, right? But a quite obvious gap in the sound there. Whereas a different version had this, and watch his face when he makes that exact same mistake. So hopefully not too theatric, but much more of a grimace, much more upset about it. And then in yet another video, we had a version where he pulls the face, but doesn't make a mistake at all. Because of course, as good scientists, we have to check every condition. So what you end up with 4 videos, perfect performance all the way through, one where he makes a mistake, but poker faces, one where he makes the mistake and pulls the face, and then finally a 4th where he pulls the face for no reason at all. And again, we can look at our lovely data and see, well, in a standard performance, there's not, it's quite straight, it's quite flat. We saw that in the last study. And here we have a blue line for musicians and a red line for non-musicians. And the musicians and non-musicians responding in a very surprisingly similar way, regardless of their musical training. We can then see if we put that mistake partway through, well, the musicians react exactly as we saw happen in the previous study. They're, oh, that wasn't very good, but I forgive you. It's like it never happened. The non-musicians just sort of plow right through in the rating, though when you ask them after, they did recognize that a mistake was there. They didn't seem to acknowledge it in their, they feel it was worth penalizing with their slider. So the question is what now happens when they pull a face? And again, the data really speak for themselves. The score plummets equally with musicians or non-musicians, and it stays down there. It never recovers. Almost a catastrophic failure, as it were. And again, you can imagine my reaction in the RCM library when I first generated this graph. So then you might be thinking, well, maybe people just don't like it when someone pulls a face. But again, we controlled for that condition. And if you just pull a face, nothing happens. It's only that combination of making an error and this grimace of acknowledgement. And again, you can dig into this further and see some of the other conditions we tested, including those stage entrances in a paper in Frontiers in Psychology. So what are the implications of this? What do we learn? Well, first, this affects performance practice. So I've had the opportunity to speak to many groups of musicians about the importance of getting those first 10 seconds right, about the importance of poker facing, about putting your best face forward as you perform, because this will change people's perceptions of you. We've had opportunities to talk to people about the practices of performance evaluation, how our biases can affect us. We've done workshops with professional musicians, including the principals of the London Philharmonic Orchestra, as well as with musicians in a module that I designed and now run at the Royal College of Music called Evaluating Performance, where we teach students how to become evaluators of music, and as well as how to prepare ourselves for evaluations. And then finally, there's our understanding of underlying cognition and decision-making that we do as humans. So in that first case, really building on decades of research, finding that our brains like to make first impressions and make these decisions very quickly, that when you meet someone for the first time, just as many of you are seeing me for the first time, in the first moments I started speaking, you started building up a model in your head of who I am and what you think of me. And this really emphasizes that. And in that second study, well, why is it that the face caused such a change? Well, there's one theory from social psychology called facial overgeneralization. And the way this works is that if you meet someone for the first time and they look happy, your brain doesn't go, oh, here's a person who in this moment is happy. Your brain goes, oh, look, a happy person. This person goes through their life full of happiness. So if you see someone for the first time performing, they make a mistake and they pull a face, your brain's not going to go, oh, here's someone who in this moment is showing frustration because they made a mistake in this moment. Your brain goes, oh, look, a frustrated mistake maker, right? So by doing these studies in music, we can also shed a much wider light on aspects of psychology, of cognition, of behavior, of decision-making. And this is one of the really exciting things about doing music research, is that we can not only help build our knowledge within our craft, but we can use music as this very powerful tool to understand a much wider range of disciplines. And this is something that we really emphasize throughout the book, these connections. So thank you very much for your attention. With that, I'll hand back to Aaron to share the question and answer portion of our talk here today.
George, thanks very much. So I want just to open the floor to any questions, if anyone has them. There are just a few questions that were posted via the chat already. So firstly, Dave Cameron mentioned whether the book would be available as an ebook. And it will be. We're assured that it will be soon. We hope very soon. The Oxford University Press website will have a link to that, as will most other websites like Amazon. And depending on how you want to read it, you can also get it through Oxford Scholarship Online. There was also one comment about the materials available on the website. So yes, those are freely available and open to the public, and they will remain there for as long as we keep paying the license on the web address. So if there are other questions, you could just post them in the comments. But I thought if I could just for a moment ask some of my own colleagues questions. I mean, I do hope that you get a sense of enthusiasm, or indeed a sense of love for music research through these presentations. It was a great pleasure putting the book together and working with Jane, with Rosie, with George, and we hope as well as you look through it, you'll find it useful. But I wonder if I can come first to you, Rosie, just to ask you a couple of follow-up questions about your project, Music and Motherhood. So could you say just a little bit more about the extent to which the project has had a wider impact? I mean, clearly what's important in understanding the effects of music on health and music on social interactions is that at some point we need to put this into practice and into action. And if we see such benefits for certain subgroups within the population, we ideally should be in a position where we start to roll this out on a wider basis. So can you say a little bit more about the impact of the project?
Yeah, of course. So we always had in mind that the project should be impactful, in the sense that ideally the research findings would be used to create ongoing or more sustainable practice. But of course, it's not always easy to do that. And so we deliberately had a dissemination strategy that went beyond peer-reviewed journal articles or conference presentations, and that deliberately tried to engage different audiences. So that included, for example, working with the British Journal of Psychiatry to do a press release when the quantitative paper came out, and that led to a lot of interest, coverage in the BBC and the ITV News, for example. And on the back of that, people's awareness was raised. And this led, for example, to other singing groups for mums using the research to evidence or to support the work that they do. Like I mentioned, it also contributed, or we were invited to contribute to policy documents. So, for example, the World Health Organization report cited this research, but also the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Arts and Health did a consultation for Arts Council where they used this research to help build up the evidence base, because there's many other projects in this area too, to build up the evidence base for how singing can be used in maternal mental health specifically. And then, of course, Breathe Arts Health Research, they're an organization that take research evidence and turn it into practice. So it's a sort of partnership in heaven, really. And they take particular programs such as ours and roll them out. And using the research evidence, they've been able to secure funding, for example, from health commissioners, from Wellcome Trust, to roll out the practice, but now also to, as I said, to replicate the study and to see whether what we found is maintained with a larger sample across a wider geographical area. Those sessions are now actually happening online because of COVID. So that's another dimension to all of this. So those are the different ways that we've tried to build impact. And it's very satisfying as a researcher, of course, to have an opportunity for evidence to be used in those ways. And it's something now that very much shapes my thinking about other research that I'm involved in.
Rosie, if I may just ask one other follow-up question. So could you say something about the other arts and health or music and health research that you've been involved in? And in particular, could you also say something about the role of that taking place in a conservatoire or a school of music? So what is the place for that type of research in an institution that's training musicians at that advanced level?
Yeah, so we've run a series of intervention projects over many years now. So we started out with a project with older adults, and we've worked with mental health service users, with new mothers, and now we're running different projects in other maternity contexts. And like I touched on at the end of my presentation, when we run these intervention projects, we engage our students and or our alumni, and we provide support and training for them to work in these contexts, because of course it's new to many people, and so ethically to them and to the people taking part, we have the responsibility to train and support them through that process. But we've also conducted research with them, which I didn't have time to describe today. And through this research, we see the development of skill sets, of the sorts of portfolios that we know that musicians will need. But we also see an improvement in their own well-being. So we find, for example, that these experiences can really lead to a meaningful, to a sense of meaning for them. It can be quite transformative, like I hinted upon, in terms of changing how they see their music making and the role of their music making. And that, for me, is why this is so central in a conservatoire, because we are institutions that love music. Music is at the heart of what we do. And the more opportunities that we can have for our students and for our alumni to make music with different people in different contexts, the better. But also the more evidence that we can build for how music fits into our society and supports people in terms of health and well-being, the more opportunities there will be in those contexts for musicians to work in the future as well.
Thank you for that. And George, can I just ask one follow-up question on your own work? And you mentioned your conversations with others about the potential applied nature of what you found. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what you've been developing recently in terms of taking this information into the curriculum at the Royal College of Music.
Mm-hmm. So we've had a real great opportunity over the last really 2 years at the Royal College of Music to take a lot of the research we do, not just around performance evaluation, not just about our arts and health, but across the range of topics that we can study in music performance and performance psychology, and inject that directly into the curriculum. It's something that the Royal College of Music does every few years. Is it really sort of takes its programs back down to base level and rebuilds them. So we'll now, as of next year, be leading 8 modules that are led by members of the Center for Performance Science, or co-led, including myself and my colleagues. So that will include a first-year module mandatory for all incoming undergraduates on musicians' health. So this is a module that I lead, though it draws on the expertise from across the college. Next year, we'll launch a new mandatory module for all of those same students now in their second year, called Professional Musician, where we look at scientifically informed good practices for being a professional. So aspects of stage presence and good communication, like we've talked about here, as well as preparing for a portfolio career, about building one's skill set as a performer. We then have targeted modules on enterprise and innovation in business, on the science of effective practice, the science of performance evaluation, a new module I'm co-leading in the history department on the role of emotion in musical composition and performance, modules on performance and technology. I believe I'm still already missing another 1 or 2. Oh, and of course, a module on the fundamentals of performance psychology for our undergrads. So there's now a whole, what we call the performance science pathway. An undergraduate musician can go through and take every single year several scientifically informed courses that are going to help them be a healthy musician, be a professional musician, be a fully informed musician, not only for their own practice, but also to help their students practice in the future.
Thanks, Jordy. It's good to know that you're busy. I see one question in the chat about how the combination of authors has shaped the book. And I wonder, Jane, if you would mind addressing that point.
I'm delighted to. It's going back quite a long way, but it's a nice story. I pitched the idea of a research methods textbook in music psychology to Martin Baum, the senior commissioning editor at Oxford University Press, because I had been teaching courses in music psychology and I didn't have appropriate resources. And a little bit of time went past. My first idea was that it would be an edited book. I had recently edited a book on another topic and I had thought, well, I know how to edit a book. And then Martin called me up and he said, you know, Aaron Williamon at the Royal College of Music has also proposed a book on research methods in music performance science. How about the two of you working together? And I said, great, because I knew Aaron very well, and we'd worked together in the past, and I had huge respect. I continue to have huge respect for Aaron as an author and as an editor, and I thought this was a really great idea. And Aaron said, I think we should bring Rosie in because she's really an expert on qualitative research, and that's something that neither of us at that point had done very much of. And then Geordie came in the fullness of time, and it's just been great because our interests are very much complementary, and I certainly have learned an enormous amount from working with George and Rosie and Aaron, and I think we would all say that we had learned from each other. But this really was a co-authored book. And it isn't just us who need to be credited as the co-authors. It's actually the generations of students who we have been teaching. So I started teaching music psychology, in fact, even before I started at the Royal Northern College of Music back in 2005, I'd been teaching courses in applied music psychology in my previous job, but not to music students. It is they who needed the information that is in the book. And certainly we were all reading each other's chapters, and we were asking the students to read them and to give us feedback. And so, really, we couldn't have done it without the students, and we couldn't have done it without each other. So thank you very much indeed, Dave, for that question. And I hope that answers it.
Yeah, and in fact, thank you to everyone for the questions you've posed. I see that we're coming 3 minutes to the hour. And at this point, I don't want us to run over, so I will hand back to Fabrice just to say thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you for your questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get time to answer all of them. And Fabrice, really thank you for the invitation. It's been a real privilege and an honor to be able to take this session.
Well, thank you very much. It's absolutely fascinating, and I really can't wait to read the book. It's rare that I'm so excited by a new book on methods and tools, but I feel it will really fill a gap, a much needed gap, and it's really interesting to see that you're covering so much ground in so different things, and with a very practical approach and example. So I'm really excited. Thank you very much to all of you. And it's also very interesting for us to see that you can apply what you're doing and put it into application with the students through courses and new modules, as George was explaining before. And when he was speaking, I was just afraid that all of our students here would take a plane as soon as they can and go across and switch institutions. Just stay with us. We are working with Brenda, our dean, on implementing the program here. Such things. No, it's really a privilege. Very happy. And I can see from the CIRMMT's perspective, so many collaborations coming up in the coming years. We have lots of students who are interested, lots of colleagues who are interested to do this kind of research, doing this kind of research. So that will be a natural path for the future. And I will just take the last minute to say that, you know, next week we have another session, another Interact at CIRMMT with Aaron again and his colleague Sarah Ascenso on positive psychology, a new lens on musicians' well-being, which is something that we are working a lot here on this notion of well-being for musicians, both from the physiological and psychological points of view. So this session was fantastic, and I'm sure next one will be too. And once again, thank you to all of you for putting this book together and the website, which is an incredible tool for all of us. Thank you very much.